Welcome to today's lecture titled An Antiracism Implementation Plan, a case study, how a decentralized liberal arts college implemented a new framework for change. My name is Dr. Michele Wright, and I'm glad to share my research with you today. The goal of today's session is to share this research and insight to bring about dialogue and present ideas on the change processes occurring at an American liberal arts college toward a more inclusive campus environment. This research came out of my recent dissertation study. Years after the election of its first African American president, it is clear from recent events that racial inequities and injustice are still deeply embedded in America's social fabric. With the 2020 racial reckoning that stemmed from the killing of George Floyd, an African American man, and others at the hands of police, America's current political institutions and organizations in the public and private sectors continue to be impacted by its historical racist legacy. However, it should be no surprise that higher education also continues to struggle to create inclusive and equitable environments with these deeply rooted cultural beliefs and structures. Anti-Black racism is a global issue, and perspectives and frameworks that address issues of inclusion are based on cultural, country, and community context. Today's lecture is based on the American historical context. The challenge, as Smith notes, is embedding it in every core function, including research, hiring, competencies required, and serving the public good. A great deal of research has been done on fostering positive and inclusive campus climates, increasing student access, advancing affirmative action, and engaging in institutional change in order to improve the student experience for minoritized and underserved students for nearly 60 years. This research includes the work of Hurtado, Ben-Simon, Smith, Harper, and others, but relatively few studies have examined change processes aimed at fostering inclusion. This case study examines the role of leadership, governance structures, and persistent student voice as powerful forces for change and offers a framework that specifies specific tactics and strategies leaders used to advance this work and enact structural and cultural change through an anti-racism lens. The significance of this study is that it provides a framework relevant to higher education institutions for implementing a change agenda for diversity initiatives and contributes to the literature around DEI change strategies and the change process. This study examined the process of implementing an anti-racism strategic plan to improve the campus racial climate, to create an inclusive environment for the campus community, utilizing qualitative methods through semi-structured interviews with 16 participants, and triangulated data across multiple sources, including institutional documents and reports, websites, news outlets, and social media, helped contextualize information and analyze data to understand how change unfolded at this institution. There were 3 research questions that guided the study. 1. How did the college attempt to advance and institutionalize DEI efforts on its campus? 2. How did organizational change related to diversity unfold at this liberal arts college? What evidence suggests that there have been shifts in comprehensive change? What are the perspectives of key longer-term constituents on campus, administration, staff, and faculty about the impact of this change effort? As I learned, and you will see, using Cotter's 8-stage change framework, as a guide toward understanding Mountain View's anti-racism implementation from a process perspective provides a structure for which change occurs and shines 3 levels of culture, provides a lens for understanding the deeply rooted practices and behaviors at the institution. I'll speak briefly here about Cotter's 8-stage process for creating major change, because we will return to this framework later in the presentation. I think it's helpful to have a little context before we get there. Cotter's 8-stage change process framework was essential to the analysis of the study and provided a lens through which to analyze the data in a comprehensive way. This framework contributed to the analysis by providing an additional lens of relevant change indicators to observe implementation and effectiveness. In Leading Change, Cotter sets up the framework in two parts and states that the first four steps in the transformation process help defrost a hardened status quo, and that phases 5 to 7 then introduce many new practices. And the last stage grounds the changes in the culture and helps make them stick. He stresses the importance of sequence for successful outcomes. Cotter's 8 stages are as follows. 1, establishing a sense of urgency. 2, creating a guiding coalition. 3, developing a vision and strategy. 4, communicating the change vision. 5, empowering broad-based action. 6, generate short-term wins. 7, consolidating gains and producing more change. 8, anchoring new approaches in the culture. Given that diversity agendas are uniquely tied to organizational culture and institutional purpose, successful institutions have, in the words of Kaiser and Eckel, regular mechanisms to keep track of their diversity efforts to ensure that they are making progress. What researchers have found is that when a diversity agenda becomes part of the culture, there is a shift in the campus-wide practices concerning diversity. Some of these mechanisms include a change in focus from student retention and access to student outcomes, as well as specific racial or ethnic groups in conjunction with other aspects of diversity such as gender, class, and the like. Research consistently shows that aligning the change effort to the culture of the institution is one of the more effective approaches to cultural change. Shine's 3 levels of culture provided a frame for a deep examination of this campus's culture. Today's lecture is about the process in which a decentralized liberal arts college, which I call Mountain View College, enacted anti-racism initiatives to foster inclusion and belonging after several failed attempts to achieve its goals. This presentation tells the story of how Mountain View College took great measures toward achieving its goal of becoming an anti-racist campus. This research offers a snapshot of some of the challenges and steps that occurred throughout a multi-year process as the continuation of this work toward change is ongoing. While the American demographic shifts have propelled liberal arts institutions to consider who they serve and how, the caveat comes when there is no foresight as to how or what change will be implemented. Liberal arts institutions have been a bastion of critical thought, but have mostly remained allies to racial inequity and lack of institutional inclusion for students from marginalized and underserved communities, as have many other types of institutions. Most recently, many of these institutions find themselves in an existential crisis of relevancy and, for some institutions, survival. When I speak about a decentralized institution, I'm talking about an institution that is non-hierarchical in structure with a shared governance model and is loosely coupled, which generates organizational complexity and ambiguity. Another important distinction is the definition of anti-racism that was used by the college. Anti-racism is defined as the active process of identifying and eliminating racism by changing systems, organizational structures, policies, practices, and attitudes so that power is redistributed and shared equitably. Anti-racism is an approach to understanding race, racism, and the evolution of racial ideology that helps us understand the many ways that racism is embedded in the structures of U.S. society, including schools, healthcare, governments, and banks. Anti-racism also helps us better understand how race, racial ideology, and racism shape our understanding of ourselves and others. This definition is helpful in understanding the emic philosophy of communal language and usage of the term at Mountain View College. The case will contextualize the institution's challenges and impetus for change and provides a longitudinal perspective that highlights its struggles and successes along the way. As mentioned, examining the change process reveals how change unfolded at Mountain View College, the role of leadership, loud and persistent student voice, and how the governance structures play a role in the change process. The evidence of change identifies concrete cultural shifts that occurred at Mountain View College and the perspectives of change by longer-term members of the community. Mountain View College is located in a mountainous region of the United States with a rich history from the 19th century. Its institutional culture is at a crossroads in the current changing times. The college is a well-endowed, small, private, four-year, highly residential institution that focuses on undergraduate education. The institution has a total enrollment of fewer than 3,000 students and offers limited and specified graduate program offerings. The academic structure at Mountain View College is based on a structured plan, which offers one course every 3.5 weeks and a 4.5 days break between courses. Mountain View College, according to the U.S. News and World Report rankings, is ranked in the top 50 liberal arts colleges and is considered highly selective. Tuition and fees exceed $60,000 US per year. Presidential leadership has changed in the past 2 years, and the campus's legacy is imbued with an omnipresent history of stolen lands, and it recently made amends by naming a parcel of land in honor of the indigenous people who originally resided in this region. The institution espouses ideals of excellence rooted in liberal arts education. Mountain View College is considered a predominantly white institution with over 65% of its student population identifying as white and a comparable percentage of students from wealthy families. Students with no aid or non-need-based aid represent about 64% of the student body, while students receiving Pell Grants, which are federally sponsored and usually are awarded only to undergraduate students who display exceptional financial need, represent just over 10%, and other need-based aid, no Pell, is about 20%. The stratified socioeconomic status is endemic in higher education. However, it is one of the significant challenges and structural barriers that President Hale, a pseudonym, acknowledged early on in her tenure when discussing initiatives for diversifying the institution. Although the institution has had an ongoing commitment to DEI, it found itself continuously challenged by external events that impacted the campus climate over the past few years. As mentioned in the opening of this lecture, the United States has a long history of racism and racial inequities. Hence, the social and racial unrest that stemmed from the inauguration of President Trump in 2017 and the murder of George Floyd in 2020 and others further exposed cultural structures that have long determined privilege for some and barriers for others. Albeit significant events that impacted the country and higher education institutions, these incidents were not the only catalyst for change at Mountain View. Diversity initiatives were already in process but had not made the comprehensive change needed to create a safe and inclusive environment for faculty, staff, and students of color. The change efforts up until this point were ineffectual in achieving comprehensive change. There were deeply held cultural and structural barriers in place that prevented the institution from achieving its diversity goals, as the committed attempts of leadership and others to make comprehensive changes to become a more inclusive institution were met with tension and resistance to those efforts. Nonetheless, these external events, along with internal challenges, were critical to the re-evaluation of campus structures and culture with regard to race, DEI, and belonging. When President Hale joined the Mountain View community, the president initiated several new initiatives in which diversity was at the heart of the mission and a new strategic plan. Strategies to increase compositional diversity, additional resources for financial aid, and faculty recruitment was included in the diversity initiatives. Efforts toward compositional diversity were evident. The data shows the shift over time during President Hale's tenure that the institution had in fact increased its non-white student population. The most significant increases were Latinx students, with an increase from 6% to 9% in 10 years, and the Black or African American students increased from 1% to 3%. Thus, compositional student diversity shifts over time were evident. However, welcoming a diverse population on campus led to an increased need for proper support structures, as some of the students from these communities struggled to fit into an institution that had structural barriers toward inclusion and successful outcomes. Through climate studies, student protests, and petitions, the leadership was aware of the student of color experiences with racism, the struggles with the intense academic schedule, and the lack of belonging that they felt, but was not effectively addressed to change the institutional culture and structures that impacted their experiences on campus. In an effort to support a more inclusive campus, a new diversity center replaced a previous minority and international student office and hired its first director, who became a member of the Student Life Division and reported to the Dean of Students. New partnerships with organizations to increase their compositional diversity were formed, and the new strategic plan and the institutional mission had diversity at the heart of it. But these efforts were not enough to shift the culture and deeply rooted assumptions, practices, and structures that were well established at Mountain View. After several futile attempts to address endemic racism and several incidents that occurred over time, a new crisis emerged that forced the institution to reevaluate all of its prior strategies for change and to take a different approach to comprehensive change. Several years ago, well-respected Black administrators were targeted in what was considered a racist and misogynist email sent to hundreds of members of the campus community. Though not the first racist incident on Mountain View's campus, this incident was one that galvanized President Hale to respond after an initial misstep in communication with the community. The president initially sent out communications stating that the email was spam mail and did not refer to the messaging as true hate mail. Some members of the campus community felt that President Hale's handling of the communications around this incident was not done well. It was met with negative feedback, especially from the Black students who felt aggrieved by the president's poor response to the incident. The college's response to the email incident led members of the Black Student Union Diversity Center to meet with President Hale to discuss her response as well as the challenges they faced on campus. During the meeting, President Hale tried explaining to the institutional response to the event, and in responding to their grievances about racist faculty and curriculum, because of the governance structures of the institution, President Hale explained to the students that she had no power over the faculty. This realization prompted the students to decide to approach the faculty themselves because they wanted institutional accountability for faculty behavior. This was the students' effort to push the administration to hold the faculty accountable. After gaining permission from the Dean of Faculty to attend a faculty meeting, the students showed up and publicly called out racist faculty and incidents that they experienced on campus, as well as a need for curricular reform to reflect a more diverse and inclusive perspective. The institution's long, fraught history of racism was now out in the open, and the lived experiences of students of color were being discussed in ways that the institution had never done before. The fallout from the meeting included faculty who were irate about the students' behavior and for being allowed by the dean to attend the faculty meeting without their prior acknowledgement. The issues were now front and center, and President Hale needed to respond with a sense of urgency to the institutional racism crisis and fractured community. This became the catalyst for change. Although previously there were a series of events and expectations that occurred that were incongruent with the organization's espoused values and institutional mission, this galvanizing event prompted the leadership to make the decision for a comprehensive institutional review with an external consultant to review the institution's climate structures, policies, and practices. To summarize and recap the sequence of events that led to the institutional crisis. A racist and misogynist email was sent and targeted Black administrators on campus. The president ineffectively responds to the email. She refers to the email as spam, not hate mail. The Black students respond, and after they met with the president, decided that attending the faculty meeting was necessary in response to the meeting with the president. Students initiate attendance at the faculty meeting and approach the dean to gain access. The faculty meeting is a catalyst for change. Students call out racist faculty, demanded curriculum reform, faculty training, accountability, and student support. And the fallout came because faculty were outraged that students were permitted to attend the meeting and call out faculty and cite specific incidents. The president and leadership consider a comprehensive institutional review, and then the president announces an external review to examine institutional racism at the college. The institution had a new goal, which was to become an anti-racist campus. Now let's look at the institution's process for change. Heiser and Eckel, in their research, define comprehensive change as change that is pervasive, affecting numerous offices and units across the institution, deep, touching upon values, beliefs, and structures, is intentional, and occurs over time. Mountain View College had embarked on new initiatives to create comprehensive change that would move it from a racist institution toward becoming an anti-racist institution. The change efforts up until this point were ineffectual in achieving comprehensive change, as the underlying issues were difficult to acknowledge for the community. The comprehensive review with an outside nationally recognized expert in diversity was an opportunity for the community to hear a different perspective about their internal challenges and acknowledge that racism was endemic at the institution. Bringing in an outside consultant did not come without resistance. Some of the long-term faculty had a hard time accepting the reality or the need for an external review on racism. Bringing in an external consultant to conduct a comprehensive review was a bold and unprecedented action by the president. Establishing a sense of urgency was critical to the change effort. Cotter's framework highlights ways in which an institution can raise the urgency level, including the use of consultants to force dialogue around difficult issues. The increase in urgency and an awakening from complacency at Mountain View College started with the racist email. The unfolding of events activated faculty, who were upset by the handling of the crisis. Students were allowed to attend a faculty meeting without their consent. Students made an effort to prompt the administration to pay attention to their concerns. In addition, administrators were overwhelmed by the acts of hate that targeted their colleagues. These elements contributed to the disequilibrium that forced this institution's president to make the bold decision to bring in consultants. As the Mountain View case points out, bringing in an external reviewer gave the president a lever to disrupt the status quo and move the institution toward the stated goal of becoming an anti-racist institution. Cotter refers to the use of external data as a way to counteract insider myopia. The expert consultant and their team were there to provide a report and make recommendations to create a new plan to help the institution to become anti-racist. The reviewers were on campus for about 3 weeks collecting data and were immersed in the institution during their time there. They sat in on classes, met with and interviewed board members, students, faculty, staff, and observed what was happening on campus. The participant interviews revealed a consistent retelling of the catalyzing events across campus and references to the report that was generated by the external review and its findings. This consistent retelling was a gauge that the messaging and communication about what prompted the new diversity plan was clear. Given what the report disclosed, it also was a disruptor to how some community members perceived their institutions. The shared governance process at Mountain View was very slow in accomplishing goals, approving initiatives, or making changes. American higher education governance and general non-hierarchical structure differ significantly from corporate management, but the strong guiding coalition is a consistent factor in the change process. Tierney clearly explains this difference. Colleges and universities are historically decentralized and relatively non-hierarchical organizations. Faculty are organized by rank, and a clear pecking order exists between the metaphorical haves and have-nots. Yet when compared with business and industry, the military or government agencies, post-secondary organizations provide their employees with a remarkable degree of latitude about how to design their workday objectives and goals. At Mountain View, the president assembled a group consisting of faculty, administrative staff, students, and alumni. The institution had a feuding faculty and members who were racist, so the level of trust to build a team based on the institutional governance structure appeared to be the least viable option and would weaken the efforts toward change. When the president assembled the ad hoc groups that would move planning forward, leadership, expertise, and diverse representation were factors that could be ascertained from the list of participants. The Guiding Coalition did not have board representation, nor did the president take on a title such as ex officio chair. The Mountain View case shows that once the leadership made the decision to move forward with hiring an outside consultant for institutional review, a new group was assembled to steer the process. The group was charged with overseeing the review process from start to finish and providing guidance to the consultants. This group became the initial guiding coalition and moving force to get the institution into a position of developing a vision to address racism on campus. The steering committee also acted as a proxy for the institution. This ensured that the reviewer captured factual information and served as a member check in the analytical process. The committee successfully led the review process as well as were instrumental in developing the new anti-racism plan. The anti-racism plan was developed and communicated as a living document that would change and develop as the community learned. Each of the goals included metrics as well as accountability measures that assigned specific stakeholder roles with oversight and responsibility for achieving the goals. There was a focus on anti-Black racism that stemmed from the external review report. As evidence from the data, the anti-racism plan was developed around this concept and became the focal point for instituting institutional change. The approach to focus on anti-Blackness and Black students gave rise to additional relational tensions between groups on campus due to this focus, and the sentiment that Black students got all the attention and Black issues and no other. The framing of anti-Black racism at the institution with 3% of its student population who identifies Black and not any of the other marginalized groups on campus was a question that surfaced throughout the data collection process. One senior leader explained that the Black people at Mountain View have a very different experience at the college than other people of color. All of these challenges stem from anti-Black sentiment embedded in American culture. For that reason, the plan was an attempt to mitigate these challenges. Aspects of the plan included accountability measures for stakeholders, communication for crisis management, specific training for faculty development and microaggressive behavior, and an institutional structure change for the role of what would be considered at some institutions as a chief diversity officer. The institution will create a 3-person diversity team to implement the plan and work with key stakeholder groups, including one that works with the academic program, one with students, and one with staff. The 3-person team was in alignment with a non-hierarchical and decentralized culture. The 3-person team would work closely with the president, vice president, and deans and an oversight committee to ensure that the anti-racism implementation is effectively distributed across the college. The plan included 7 goals. Implementing DEI change strategies involves an iterative process that requires sustained efforts, alignment, and framing of the goals within the context of the institution. Some of the leadership strategies that were utilized were mentorship and staff development, faculty development, programs and curriculum, new accountability measures, changes in hiring practices, policy changes, recruitment strategies, resource alignment and management, communication, new initiatives, and ad hoc committees as guiding coalitions. While investigating how change unfolded at Mountain View College, what was revealed was that although the institution was in a nascent phase of implementation, this did not impact the observed non-sequential order of the Cotter model. Although Cotter suggests that the change framework is ineffective unless it is sequential, in implementing an anti-racist agenda, there were nuances and aspects of the 8-stage process that were consistently applied throughout the process. On the left shows the sequential model that we discussed earlier, and on the right illustrates the process at Mountain View. All of the elements were there, but the sequence was different. A few of the processes were sequential, which included establishing a sense of urgency, creating the guiding coalition, and developing a vision and strategy. As the crisis unfolded, there was evidence of parallel processes that coincided with these 3 stages. This figure illustrates Cotter's model reimagined for the process in which the plan was implemented at Mountain View College. The institution had a catalyst that initiated a sense of urgency and an opportunity to move from complacency to action. The case highlighted ways in which the crisis prompted the president to establish a sense of urgency and establish a guiding coalition to create a vision and strategy for the work. A notable finding is that while this was taking place, short-term wins were generated along the way that they attempted to anchor in the culture. This anchoring led to consolidating gains and producing more change that was also anchored in the culture. The entire process necessitated two of Cotter's elements that worked in parallel to these processes: communicating the change vision and empowering broad-based action to remove obstacles. When I asked a member of the community about how the change process is implemented, the response was, "You do it all at the same time. It was not an either or." And we didn't stop in the pandemic, right? And I think some people thought we would. We did not. We hired the faculty DEI expert. We hired the student expert. We had a failed search for the staff one, which gave us an opportunity to reconfigure it and actually have it not be an HR position, but to think about administrative and financial services, because where you spend your money matters and your policies and your partners matter. An important finding from the data is that Cotter's prescribed order of change process was not as straightforward in the context of a liberal arts institution. As mentioned previously, all aspects of Cotter's framework were apparent, but were not ordered sequentially. However, at Mountain View, the components of the 8 stages were utilized strategically based on the needs of the institution and its context. The leadership change strategies that were discussed before were identified throughout the 8-stage change process as shown on this slide. A holistic approach toward implementing a diversity agenda engenders a sense of purpose when framed contextually within the values held dear to institutional stakeholders committed to those values, i.e., when aligned with institutional culture. The case supports findings that Mountain View College had a mission-centered approach to developing the plan and relied on institutional stakeholders to instill those values and were grounded in that purpose. Another finding, as it relates to the elimination of barriers that could hinder the goal's success, was evident in the planning process. There was evidence of change, as shown here. There was an increase in faculty of color and compositional diversity overall. There was less institutional complacency. There was a shift in resource allocations, new hiring practices, early retirements of old guard faculty, policy changes, faculty handbooks, staff handbooks, faculty development, new recruitment strategies, more student contentment, changes in practices, staff development, and new partnerships. A key finding in the study is that communication was essential to the change process in Mountain View. It was intentionally instituted as a strategic goal within the anti-racism plan. Some of the challenges that institutions face stem from communication tools that were effective in the past and are becoming outdated for the newer generation. Communicating the plan was not always an easy endeavor, but communication was at the center of what the plan was trying to accomplish. Another finding indicated that communication efforts were aligned to address all stakeholders on campus, but messaging had to be strategically aligned with the group receiving the message. A key finding was that using consistent language to discuss the vision and the change effort is vital to communal understanding. Communication is essential to relaying information to the community. Accurate, informative, and transparent communication are common threads that were present in the data that supported community members' needs to understand what was happening around them. Transparency and truthfulness in communications provided opportunities to engender supportive and trusting relationships among the communicators and the community. One finding from the Mountain View case is that even with strategic communication, there were still tensions around the term anti-racism. The term provoked visceral reactions from certain ethnic groups on campus. As the Mountain View case shows, although the messaging was clear and people understood, for example, what anti-racism meant, some members struggled to accept its meaning. The plan consisted of vocabulary and definitions to unify the use of the terms highlighted in the plan. The language created dialogue around the use of the word anti-racism as opposed to anti-oppression to make it more accessible to some community members. Another finding was that the institutional website was used as a hub to promote the plan and to provide updates about the work that was being done. At Mountain View, a link to the plan was embedded on the landing page and header on the website. Additionally, the case highlighted the need for forums to engage the community in the new plan. The forums included lectures from external visiting professionals and professors, workshops, learning opportunities, and community events designated by the DEI leadership for their area of expertise for students, faculty, and staff. Including the communication department in the plan created a platform to implement the change needed as well as address the overall systemic issue. The case highlighted the prevalence of the prior communication dysfunction, which led to a goal in the diversity plan. Constraints in communication present challenges and limit what transparency and truth mean in the realm of lived experiences within the community and the specific agenda or issue being communicated. Removing institutional barriers that thwart the change effort long-term is essential in implementing a change vision. Mountain View created opportunities on its campus to remove the obstacles that limited effective implementation of the anti-racism plan. Not all the efforts were immediately successful in achieving the outlined goals. However, incremental changes began to emerge. As the Mountain View case showed, there was a great eagerness and urgency to implement the new plan. Several of the initiatives and strategies included new programs developed by the new diversity leadership. Programs focused on faculty were designed to address multiple levels of leadership and pedagogical approaches that would make the classroom more inclusive. Mentorship opportunities for junior faculty were designed to provide support and to create a sense of belonging and enhance retention. Student recruitment included partnerships with outside organizations that filled a structural need in the admission department. These external programs were designed to provide access for talented students from underserved communities to attend highly desirable colleges and universities. Issues of access extended beyond the admission process. Additional resources for students, once they were on campus, were limited to the already established culture that was reflective of the nature of relationships at the college. As the data revealed, complacency was a barrier to change. The president found ways to remove some of the challenges impacting the institution as the crises emerged. The institution implemented structural changes. As part of the institutional review report at Mountain View, it highlighted a new DEI plan, which included the new institutional structure of a 3-person DEI team. The team was accountable for implementing the plan and stakeholder accountability across the campus for each set goal. Programs and policy changes were core components of the change process to remove barriers. Staffing changes were instrumental in achieving broad-based action. 1 year at Mountain View saw a significant number of new employees. As the institutional culture began to shift, the need for new thinking and new ideas was the approach there. The institution instituted policy reviews and changes that were done internally or with external consultants who specialized in this process. They started with the student handbook and then began reviewing the faculty handbook. They used the same scholar for the faculty and student handbooks, but the dean of students was used as an internal member for the community for the staff handbook. According to one study participant, the results of the review revealed that the policies did not necessarily reflect racist systems, but the relational networks on campus were at play and perpetuated a perception of inequity as it pertained to policy and practice. One participant noted, the consultant who did that work for us, who was in residence for a semester to do the work, the policies and outcomes were not, but the perception of the language and application. We absolutely got and understood how students could see that. Especially this college struggles as a place that's very relationship oriented. So if you're not in the group, faculty, staff, or students who have those relationships with people administering the structure or system, you perceive that structure differently than those that are. This is a quote that illustrates how institutional policies were being implemented through cultural practices. An interesting finding is that institutional policies in themselves may not be racist, but the way they are enacted could be inequitable. Hence, the institutional policies may generate the same conclusion of lived experience based on the institutional practice as it correlates to relational networks and the interpretation of the policy's language. The Mountain View case illustrated that there is no equitable system for faculty without metrics in place for the tenure process. This finding showcased how faculty of color felt more vulnerable about achieving full professor status because there were no measures of accountability that would confirm their qualifications. This state left them open to racist practices or not achieving full professor status. The case also highlighted the power struggle with the higher level faculty who were endowed with a certain level of power and privilege. At Mountain View, in efforts to diversify the faculty, the hiring of new faculty was apparent. However, there was a lack of an inclusive environment for the newer faculty of color, with the older guard white faculty creating a culture war that did not engender trust. The shifting landscape and the changing perception of power and its dynamics were relational and required intervention. Diversity work is empathy work with advocacy and action. What is evident is that diversity work is not just about issues of race, gender, and disability, but extends to human compatibility and empathy. Today's lecture provides valuable insight into how one institution's process for implementing an anti-racism plan to create a more inclusive campus unfolded. The framework presented is relevant to higher education practitioners and leaders for implementing a change agenda for diversity initiatives and contributes to the literature around DEI change strategies and the change process. Establishing a sense of urgency to move a change agenda forward is essential to begin any DEI change process. Without understanding the underlying causes of institutional complacency or its challenges, or without recognizing the indicators, it would be difficult to motivate community members. Without a sense of urgency to deal with a current or impending crisis, garnering support for the change effort could be difficult, especially with the inevitable resistance as part of the process. As the case and the analysis show, Mountain View College had a catalyzing event that prompted the president to bring in an external reviewer who helped initiate the change effort. Cotter considers bringing in consultants as a bold move and says that hiring consultants to gather and then force discussion of honest information at meetings, even though you know that such a strategy will upset some people greatly, could create challenges for incumbent leaders. However, the use of an external review to combat insider myopia was beneficial in moving an anti-racism agenda forward. In order to achieve what is good for the community and the organization's continued growth as it relates to DEI and anti-racism, leaders have to invest and commit to taking bold steps toward change. The case illustrates how the president initiated the process but relied on ad hoc committees to work around the pre-established faculty structures. What was evident was that faculty structures can be a force of resistance to change. The tensions between faculty and administration to implement change were expressed by several participants in the study. In Hartley's research on what he classifies as parallel governance structures, he states that leaders play a key role in establishing and maintaining the legitimacy of the governance process. They do this through multiple means, by providing ways for individuals to participate in the decision-making process, by ensuring that the process is as free from bias as possible, and by modeling just behavior. Using ad hoc committees is useful in implementing the change effort and should include members of the faculty. Cotter refers to these groups as guiding coalitions and states. A guiding coalition that operates as an effective team can process more information more quickly. It can also speed the implementation of new approaches because powerful people are truly informed and committed to key decisions. The ad hoc committees that work within the traditional governance model of the institution can help create new alliances and situate cross-institutional collaboration. Accountability measures are needed to manage the process and are an essential element of enacting change. The accountability component of the change process was an important point that was reiterated throughout participant interviews. Thank you. This concludes the presentation.